The red dwarf, star designated HD 164595, B had been traveling through the void for over 2 million years, a rogue planet cast from its original system by gravitational chaos. Its surface was a wasteland of frozen methane and crystallized atmosphere, but its arrival at the edge of Earth's solar system triggered something unprecedented in human history. Ambassador Sura Clay stood at the observation deck of Luna Station, watching the distant crimson dot through the reinforced transparent aluminum. At 43, she had spent the last 15 years representing Earth's interests in various interplanetary negotiations, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The rogue planet had appeared 6 months ago, following a trajectory that would bring it dangerously close to Jupiter's orbit before slingshotting back into deep space. "Ma'am, we're receiving another transmission," said Dr. Elena Vasquez, her chief science advisor. The woman's voice carried an edge of barely controlled anxiety that had become familiar since the first contact 3 days ago. Sura turned from the viewport, her reflection ghosting across the surface. Dark skin marked by years of diplomatic stress, close-cropped silver hair that had gone gray early, and eyes that had seen too many compromises. The same message. Identical in every way. The linguistic algorithms are still working on the translation, but the core meaning remains unchanged. The Terran delegation will present themselves before the Skyborn Tribunal for adjudication of historical grievances. Non-compliance will result in cessation protocols. Cessation protocols. The phrase had haunted Sura's dreams since the first transmission. Whatever it meant, the unanimous consensus among Earth's xenolinguistics teams was that it represented something terminal. The transmission had come not from the rogue planet itself, but from something hiding in its shadow, a structure so vast that it bent light around its edges, visible only through gravitational lensing. Earth's most powerful telescopes had detected hints of its presence, geometric patterns that suggested artificial construction, energy signatures that defied known physics, and a silence that spoke of intelligence waiting with infinite patience. "Director Chun wants to speak with you," Dr. Vasquez continued, gesturing toward the communication console. "He's concerned about the latest intelligence reports." Sura nodded and activated the secure channel. Director Cheniming's weathered face materialized in the holographic display, transmitted from Earth's Global Diplomatic Command Center in Geneva. Behind him, she could see the frantic activity of the crisis management team, dozens of analysts, xenobiologists, and military strategists working around the clock to understand their visitors. "Ambassador Clay," Chen began without preamble, "we've made a breakthrough in the translation matrix. Our AI systems have identified recurring patterns in the transmissions that correspond to galactic standard temporal markers. They're using references to Earth's orbital periods, but not current ones, orbital periods from approximately 65 million years ago." Sura felt a chill that had nothing to do with Luna Station's atmospheric controls. The KPG boundary. The Cretaceous extinction event. Exactly. Whatever this tribunal wants to discuss, it relates to something that happened when the dinosaurs died. Chen's expression was grim. "But there's more. We've detected launch signatures from the structure. Something is coming this way, and our best estimates put its arrival at Luna Station in 14 hours. The implication struck Sura like a physical blow. If these entities, whatever they were, had knowledge of Earth's deep history, if they were capable of interstellar travel and had been watching humanity's development for millions of years, then Earth was dealing with something far beyond their current understanding of the universe. "What are my orders?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "You're humanity's representative, Sura. You've negotiated with the Martian colonial councils, mediated the Europa mining disputes, even managed to establish trade relations with the Titan corporate enclaves. If anyone can navigate whatever's coming, it's you. Those were humans, Director. This is..." She gestured toward the viewport where the rogue planet hung like a malevolent eye. "This is something else entirely, which is exactly why we need our best diplomat out there. Dr. Vasquez will accompany you as science advisor, along with a cultural analysis team. You'll be our voice, our advocate, our hope." After Chin signed off, Sura remained at the viewport, watching the cosmic interloper that had brought such momentous change to their solar system. Somewhere in her mind, she could feel the weight of 65 million years pressing down, all of human history, all of their achievements and failures, reduced to a single question. What had their ancestors done? The vessel that came for them defied every principle of aerospace engineering that humanity had developed over 3 centuries of spaceflight. It moved without visible propulsion, made no attempt to match Luna Station's orbital velocity, and somehow maintained a stable position relative to the station despite the complex gravitational dynamics of the Earth-Luna system. Sura's first glimpse of it through the docking bay's observation port left her speechless. The craft seemed to be constructed from crystallized space itself, translucent surfaces that caught and refracted starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Its geometry shifted depending on the viewing angle, sometimes appearing as a perfect sphere, other moments resembling a complex polyhedron with surfaces that folded into impossible configurations. Dimensional folding, Dr. Vasquez whispered beside her, clutching her portable sensor array. The hull exists in more than 3 spatial dimensions. Our instruments can't get a consistent reading. It's like trying to measure the volume of a sphere by examining its shadow. The docking process required no coordination from Luna Station's traffic control. The alien vessel simply extended what appeared to be a tube of the same crystalline material, which merged seamlessly with the station's airlock. When the seals verified, Sura led her small delegation through the portal that would change everything. The interior of the ship was a symphony of flowing geometries and soft illumination that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. There was no visible technology, no control surfaces, no indication of how the vessel operated. Instead, they found themselves in a space that felt both vast and intimate, with corridors that curved gently upward until they became ceilings, and chambers that existed in architectural relationships that made Sura's inner ear protest. Their host appeared without fanfare or announcement, materializing from the wall itself, as if stepping through a doorway that hadn't existed moments before. The being that faced them was humanoid in basic structure, but composed of the same translucent material as the ship, a figure of living crystal with features that suggested both tremendous age and ageless existence. "I'm Attendant Zephyra," it said, though its mouth didn't move and the words seemed to form directly in their minds. "I serve the Skyborn Tribunal in matters of intertemporal jurisprudence. You are the Terran delegation." Sura stepped forward, drawing on decades of diplomatic training to maintain her composure. "I am Ambassador Sura Clay, representing Earth and all human colonies in this solar system. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, my science advisor, and cultural analyst Dr. James Wright. Your credentials are noted and verified against the Akashic records," Zephyr replied. "The Tribunal has been expecting this delegation for 65,247,891 Terran orbital cycles. We will now proceed to the court station." The transition was instantaneous and disorienting. One moment, they stood in the crystal corridor of the alien vessel. The next, they emerged onto a platform that stretched beyond the horizon in all directions. Above them, instead of a sky, was the cosmic infrastructure of the Skyborn Tribunal, a vast mechanical ecosystem that sprawled across the space between stars. Sura gazed upward at structures that dwarfed planets, connected by bridges of light that pulsed with the traffic of beings and vehicles beyond counting. Massive spheres rotated slowly in the distance, their surfaces alive with cities that followed geometries unknown to human architects. Flying creatures that might have been technological or biological, or both, moved in graceful formations between towers that reached toward infinity. "The court station exists partially outside normal space-time," Zephyr explained, noting their expressions of awe. "What you perceive is a projection optimized for your species' sensory limitations. The full reality would be incomprehensible to minds that evolved in only 3 spatial dimensions." Dr. Wright, whose specialty was xenocultural analysis, stepped forward with shaking hands. "How long has this existed? How many species are represented here?" The tribunal was established 847 million years ago, when the first sapient species achieved interstellar capability and began affecting the development of other worlds. Currently, we maintain oversight for 127,643 species across this galactic sector. Each must eventually face judgment for their actions across deep time. The implication struck Sura like a series of hammer blows. If the tribunal had existed for nearly 1 billion years, if they monitored and judged civilizations across geological timescales, then humanity was not facing first contact with another species. They were facing a cosmic justice system that had been watching and waiting since before complex life had even emerged on Earth. "What are we accused of?" she asked, though part of her feared the answer. That information will be provided during the formal proceedings. However, I am authorized to inform you that the charges relate to the Terran intervention protocols enacted during the late Cretaceous period, resulting in ecosystem collapse and the extinction of 76% of planetary biodiversity. Dr. Vasquez made a strangled sound. That's impossible. Humans didn't exist 65 million years ago. We didn't even exist as a species until a few 100,000 years ago. Zephyr's crystalline features shifted in what might have been the equivalent of a sad smile. Temporal causality is more complex than your species currently understands. The charges relate not to your past actions, but to your future ones. Actions that have already been taken from the tribunal's perspective, but which lie in your species' causal future. The platform began to move, carrying them across the impossible landscape of the court station toward a structure that rose like a crystal mountain in the distance. As they traveled, Sura tried to process what she had just learned. Humanity was being tried for crimes they hadn't yet committed, for an intervention in Earth's past that had caused the death of the dinosaurs. How is that possible? She asked. How can we be held responsible for something we haven't done? Time is not linear at the cosmic scale, Zephyr replied. Causality loops and temporal paradoxes are fundamental aspects of reality when consciousness spans sufficient temporal distances. Your species will develop time travel capabilities in approximately 23,000 years. At that point, a faction of your descendants will attempt to prevent the Chicxulub impact by redirecting the asteroid. Their intervention will instead cause a cascade collapse that results in far greater extinction than the natural event would have produced. The crystal mountain grew larger as they approached, revealing itself to be a courthouse of impossible proportions. Its walls were inscribed with flowing scripts in thousands of languages, recording the judgment of species across the galaxy. Some names were inscribed in what appeared to be gold, others in what looked like ash. Too many were written in ash. What happened to the species whose names are written in ash? Dr. Wright asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. Cessation protocols, Zephyr replied. When a species' crimes against cosmic order are deemed irredeemable, when their continued existence poses a threat to the development of other civilizations, the tribunal authorizes their removal from the timeline. They are deleted not just from the present, but from all possible futures. It is as if they never existed. Sura felt the weight of her species' future pressing down on her shoulders. Somewhere in humanity's causal future, they would develop technology that allowed them to travel through time. They would use that technology to try to save the dinosaurs, and in doing so, they would commit a crime so severe that an interstellar tribunal had been waiting 65 million years to judge them for it. As the platform carried them toward the entrance of the cosmic courthouse, she realized that her role had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just an ambassador. She was humanity's defense attorney in a trial that would determine whether her species had a right to continue existing. The trial chamber existed in a space that challenged the fundamental assumptions of Euclidean geometry. Sura found herself standing on what appeared to be a platform of crystallized light, while above, below, and around her stretched tiers of seating that extended into dimensional folds her mind refused to fully process. The representatives of the Skyborn Tribunal were arranged in these impossible galleries, beings of such diversity that no human xenobiologist had ever imagined anything comparable. Some were clearly organic in origin, though evolved far beyond anything that had developed on Earth. Others appear to be purely mechanical, their bodies works of living art crafted from materials that shifted between states of matter. Still others defied classification entirely, entities of pure energy contained within geometric frameworks, crystalline lattices that pulsed with sentient thought, and creatures that seemed to exist as living equations made manifest in three-dimensional space. At the center of it all, presiding over the cosmic court, was the entity that attendant Zephyr had identified as Adjudicator Prime Xylos. Its form was that of a vast tree composed of flowing mercury, its branches reaching into dimensional spaces that Sura's eyes couldn't follow. Where a face might have been, constellations of light pulsed in patterns that conveyed meaning beyond language. The Terran delegation is recognized, Xylos announced, its voice resonating through dimensions Sura couldn't perceive. Ambassador Sura Clay, you stand before the Skyborn Tribunal as advocate for the species designation soul. 3. Homo. Sapiens. Sapiens. Do you understand the nature of the charges brought against your civilization? Sura stepped forward, drawing on every diplomatic protocol she had ever learned while knowing that none of them had prepared her for this moment. Adjudicator Prime, I understand that humanity is accused of temporal intervention resulting in mass extinction during Earth's late Cretaceous period. However, I must respectfully challenge the fundamental premise of these proceedings. A ripple of what might have been surprise or amusement passed through the assembled tribunal. Xylos's constellation features shifted in patterns that suggested interest. You would challenge the authority of this court? Not the authority, but the logical foundation, Sura replied. You're holding my species accountable for actions that exist only in a potential future timeline. Humanity has not yet developed temporal manipulation technology. We have not yet committed the acts described in your charges. To judge us for crimes that may never occur violates basic principles of justice that transcend species and dimensional boundaries. An interesting perspective, Xylos acknowledged. However, your assertion demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of temporal mechanics. Attendant Zephyra, please activate the Akashic records for the Terran timeline. The space around them transformed into something that resembled a vast library, but instead of books, the shelves contained what appeared to be living crystals, each one pulsing with captured light. Zephyr gestured, and several of the crystals detached from their housings, floating through the air to hover around the trial platform. The Akashic records contain the complete causal history of every significant event in this galactic sector, Zephyr explained. They are not predictions or possibilities, but records of events that have already occurred from the perspective of cosmic time. Observe. The crystals began to glow, and suddenly Sura found herself witnessing history, as if she were present during the events themselves. She saw Earth as it had been during the late Cretaceous, a lush, warm world where massive dinosaurs moved through fern forests and early flowering plants. The planet teemed with life and forms that would never evolve again. Then came the intervention. Ships materialized in Earth's atmosphere, sleek vessels that bore the unmistakable hallmarks of human technology, albeit far more advanced than anything currently existing. Sura watched as these future humans deployed massive gravitational manipulation devices, attempting to deflect the asteroid that history recorded as the Chicxulub impactor. But something went wrong. Instead of deflecting the asteroid cleanly away from Earth, the gravitational fields interacted in unexpected ways. The space rock shattered into dozens of fragments, each one still massive enough to cause catastrophic damage. What should have been a single impact became a sustained bombardment that lasted for months. The climate effects were far more severe than the natural event would have produced, leading to temperature drops that lasted for centuries rather than decades. Sura watched in horror as the extended impact winter-killed not just the dinosaurs, but entire ecosystems that might have survived the original timeline. Species that should have evolved into Earth's future biodiversity were wiped from existence. Evolutionary pathways that might have led to intelligence were severed forever. The natural Chicxulub impact would have eliminated approximately 65% of Earth's biodiversity, Xylos explained as the visions faded. The temporal intervention increased that figure to 94%. Your species' attempt to play gods with deep time resulted in one of the most severe extinction events in galactic history. Dr. Vasquez, who had been recording everything on her instruments, looked up with tears in her eyes. But that's not us. That's not who we are now. Those people, those ships, they represent technology and capabilities we can't even imagine. Yet they are unquestionably human, replied another tribunal member, a being that resembled a geometric arrangement of rotating rings. The genetic markers are identical. The cultural artifacts recovered from the wreckage match Terran symbolic patterns. These are your descendants, acting with the impulsiveness and short-sightedness that your species has demonstrated throughout its recorded history. Sura felt the weight of cosmic justice pressing down on her, but she also felt something else, a growing understanding of what was really at stake. You're not just judging us for what our descendants did, she realized. You're judging us for what we might become. You're trying to determine whether humanity as a species can be trusted with the power to affect cosmic history. Precisely, Xylos confirmed. The question before this tribunal is not merely whether your species committed the crime, but whether allowing your continued development serves the greater good of the galaxy. Many civilizations develop temporal manipulation capabilities. Most use them responsibly, understanding the delicate nature of causality. But some. The adjudicator's features darkened. Some cannot resist the temptation to improve history, to correct what they perceive as mistakes or tragedies. Around the trial chamber, other crystals began to glow, showing examples of species that had failed this test. Sura saw worlds where time-traveling civilizations had attempted to prevent natural disasters, only to create cascading paradoxes that destroyed entire galactic regions. She witnessed species that had used temporal technology to wage war across multiple timelines simultaneously, creating causal loops that threatened the stability of reality itself. "The pattern is always the same," another tribunal member observed, this one appearing as a cloud of sentient plasma. Species develop the power to alter the past, convinced they can do better than the natural order of events. They never consider that what they perceive as tragedies or mistakes might be necessary foundations for future development. Sura felt her diplomatic training reasserting itself, providing structure for her thoughts even in this impossible situation. If the crime has already been committed from your perspective, if the timeline you've shown us is fixed and immutable, then what is the purpose of this trial? Why bring us here if the verdict is already determined? Because time is not immutable, Xylos replied. The intervention your descendants enacted exists in the current timeline, yes. But timelines can be revised under extreme circumstances. If this tribunal determines that humanity poses an existential threat to galactic stability, we have the authority to implement retroactive cessation protocols. Your species would be removed not just from the future, but from the past as well. The timeline would be revised so that humanity never evolved at all. The implication struck Sura like a physical blow. Not only were they facing extinction as a species, but potential erasure from history itself. If the tribunal ruled against them, it would be as if humans had never existed. All of their art, their literature, their scientific discoveries, their love, their struggles, their dreams, all of it would be deleted from the cosmos. However, Xylos continued, there is another option. If this tribunal determines that humanity can be guided toward a more responsible path, if evidence can be presented that your species is capable of learning from the mistakes of your temporal descendants, then the timeline can be preserved while implementing safeguards to prevent the future crime. What kind of safeguards? Dr. Wright asked, speaking for the first time since entering the trial chamber. Temporal locks, Attendant Zephyr explained. Quantum-level restrictions that would prevent your species from ever developing functional time travel technology. You would be permitted to continue your natural development, but certain scientific discoveries would become literally impossible for human minds to comprehend. Sura realized she was facing a choice that would determine not just humanity's survival, but the fundamental nature of their future development. They could accept the locks and preserve their existence while sacrificing the potential for time travel, or they could fight for their species' right to develop without restrictions, knowing that failure would mean complete erasure from history. I request time to prepare a defense, she said, her voice steady despite the cosmic weight of the moment. Granted, Xylos replied. You have one rotation of your home planet to present evidence that humanity deserves to exist without restriction. Choose wisely, Ambassador Clay. The future of your species rests in your words. The chamber they provided for Sura's preparation was a marvel of alien architecture, a space that somehow felt both vast and intimate, with walls that displayed real-time views of Earth from impossible angles. She could see the blue marble of humanity's home world, peaceful and unaware that its entire future hung in the balance light years away. Dr. Vasquez had been working frantically with her instruments, trying to understand the technology that surrounded them, while Dr. Wright pored over cultural analysis protocols that seemed utterly inadequate for their current situation. But Sura found herself drawn to the viewing wall, watching Earth turn slowly in the void. 24 hours to save humanity, she murmured to herself. No pressure. Ambassador, Dr. Wright said, looking up from his data pad. I've been analyzing the trial proceedings from cultural perspective. The Skyborn Tribunal isn't just a court, it's an intervention system. They don't just judge species. They guide the development of galactic civilization by preventing certain evolutionary pathways. What do you mean? Think about it. They've been operating for nearly 1 billion years, monitoring the development of over 100,000 species. They're not just enforcing cosmic law. They're actively shaping the character of civilizations that achieve interstellar capability. Sura turned from the viewing wall, her mind racing. You're suggesting this is more than a trial. It's a test. Exactly. They want to see how we respond to impossible moral pressure. Do we accept the temporal locks to preserve our existence? Do we fight for unrestricted development regardless of the consequences? Or do we find a third option they haven't considered? Dr. Vasquez looked up from her instruments. I've been analyzing the energy signatures from the Akashic records. The timeline they showed us, the one where our descendants caused the mass extinction, it's not the only possible future. The quantum resonance patterns suggest multiple branching possibilities, multiple timelines. More than that, the records contain dozens of potential futures for humanity. In some, we never develop time travel at all. In others, we use it responsibly. But there's something else. She hesitated, checking her readings again. The extinction timeline isn't just one possibility among many. It's being actively reinforced somehow, made more probable than the alternatives. Sura felt a chill of understanding. They're not just observing our future, they're influencing it. The very act of showing us that timeline, of putting us on trial for it, makes it more likely to occur. It's called a causal enforcement loop, Wright added, his cultural analysis training finally finding relevance. By treating the extinction timeline as if it's already happened, they're creating psychological and sociological pressures that make it more likely to actually happen. It's a form of temporal manipulation disguised as justice. The implications were staggering. The Skyborn Tribunal wasn't just judging humanity for crimes they might commit. They were actively making those crimes more likely by the very nature of the trial. It was the most sophisticated form of social control Sura had ever encountered, operating across millions of years and multiple species. But why? She asked. What purpose does this serve? Control, Wright replied. Think about what they're offering as alternatives. Either accept technological limitations that prevent time travel, or face erasure from history. Either way, they maintain control over cosmic development. No species gets to challenge their authority over temporal affairs. Sura began to pace the chamber, her mind working through the diplomatic implications. She had negotiated with corporate interests that sought to control entire planets, with military factions that viewed diplomacy as another form of warfare, with cultural extremists who believed their way of life justified any action. But she had never faced an opponent that could manipulate the very fabric of causality to maintain its position. There has to be something we're missing, she said. A civilization that's existed for nearly 1 billion years doesn't maintain power just through brute force or technological superiority. They have to offer something that other species want badly enough to accept their authority. Stability, Dr. Vasquez suggested. Temporal manipulation is dangerous. We saw the examples they showed us. Species that created causal paradoxes, civilizations that destroyed themselves trying to perfect their past. Maybe the Tribunal's control prevents cosmic-scale disasters. Or maybe, Wright countered, they prevent the kinds of discoveries that would challenge their authority. What if time travel could be used safely, but only if it's developed in ways they don't approve of? What if there are forms of temporal manipulation that could threaten their power structure? Sura stopped pacing as a new thought occurred to her. Attendant Zephyr said that 23,000 years in our future, humanity would develop time travel and cause the extinction event. But she also said the tribunal has records of everything that happens. If they know what we're going to do, why didn't they intervene before the crime was committed? Unless, Dr. Vasquez said slowly, they needed the crime to be committed. What if the extinction event serves their purposes somehow? The viewing wall suddenly flickered, displaying a new image, not Earth, but the cosmic structure of the court station itself. For the first time, Sura could see the full scope of the tribunal's infrastructure, and what she saw made her gasp. The station wasn't built around a star or powered by fusion reactors. Instead, it drew its energy from something far more exotic, the temporal fluctuations created by the intersection of multiple timeline branches. Every species brought before the tribunal, every decision to impose temporal locks or authorize cessation protocols, generated quantum resonance that the station harvested for power. They're energy parasites, she breathed. The entire tribunal system is powered by temporal paradoxes and timeline manipulations. They don't prevent cosmic disasters, they feed on them. Wright and Vasquez joined her at the viewing wall, staring at the revelation displayed in the alien technology's readouts. The Skyborn Tribunal wasn't a justice system, or even a control mechanism. It was a cosmic predator that had perfected the art of farming temporal energy from the civilizations it claimed to guide. Every species they've judged, every timeline they've altered, every civilization they've erased, it all feeds back into their power structure, Wright realized. They're not maintaining cosmic order. They're maintaining their own existence by creating the very chaos they claim to prevent. Sura felt the weight of the decision before her shift dramatically. This wasn't about proving humanity's worthiness or accepting limitations on their development. This was about exposing a billion-year-old fraud that had shaped the development of galactic civilization to serve the needs of temporal parasites. We can't win this trial by defending humanity's future actions, she said. We have to put the tribunal itself on trial. Dr. Vasquez was still studying the energy readouts. But how do we prove this to the assembled species? Many of them have probably been under tribunal authority for millions of years. Their entire understanding of cosmic order is based on accepting the tribunal's legitimacy. We use their own system against them, Sura replied, a plan beginning to form in her mind. The Akashic records contain the complete causal history of every significant event in this galactic sector. If we can access the records showing the tribunal's own origins, we can demonstrate how they've manipulated timeline development for their own benefit. That would require accessing restricted records, Wright warned. The kind of information they wouldn't want any species to see. Then we break into their archives, Sura said simply. Dr. Vasquez, can your instruments interface with their quantum storage systems? Possibly, but the security protocols would be beyond anything we've ever encountered. Not if we have inside help. Sura turned back to the viewing wall, studying the images of the court station structure. Attendant Zephyr said there are over 127,000 species represented in the tribunal. That's a lot of civilizations that have accepted limitations on their development. Some of them must have figured out what we just discovered. The plan was audacious and dangerous, but it was also their only chance to save humanity without accepting the crippling restrictions the tribunal wanted to impose. They had less than 18 hours to expose a billion-year-old conspiracy and convince an interstellar court to overturn the fundamental assumptions of cosmic governance. As Sura began to work out the details of what amounted to the most important heist in galactic history, she realized that the stakes had grown beyond humanity's survival. If they succeeded, they wouldn't just be saving their own species. They would be liberating every civilization that had ever been forced to accept the tribunal's false authority. If they failed, the tribunal would ensure that no species ever got a chance to challenge them again. The first challenge was making contact with potential allies without alerting the tribunal's monitoring systems. Sura realized that in a court station housing representatives from over 100,000 species, there had to be others who harbored doubts about the system they served. Dr. Wright's cultural analysis protocols proved unexpectedly useful for this task. By studying the behavior patterns of different species representatives during the trial proceedings, he identified several groups that showed signs of what he termed submission stress, behavioral markers indicating coerced cooperation rather than genuine loyalty. The Zilithian delegation keeps making gesture sequences that roughly translate to hidden truth, he reported. And the crystalline beings from the Tau Ceti system have been modulating their harmonic resonances in patterns that suggest coded communication attempts. Can you establish contact without triggering security alerts? Sura asked. I think so. Their quantum translation matrices are designed to facilitate communication between incompatible species, but they also create opportunities for steganographic messaging, hiding information in the translation protocols themselves. While Wright worked on establishing covert communications, Dr. Vasquez focused on the technical challenge of accessing the Akashic records. Her analysis of the station's energy systems had revealed something crucial. The records weren't stored in conventional databases, but as quantum impressions in the temporal fluctuations that powered the entire structure. It's actually elegant, she explained as she calibrated her instruments. Every time someone accesses the records, they create minor temporal eddies. The tribunal probably assumes those fluctuations are just background noise from the station's operations. But if we can generate the right resonance patterns, we should be able to access archived data without leaving detectable traces. The breakthrough came when Wright successfully established contact with the Zilithian delegation. The Zilithians were an ancient species, nearly as old as the tribunal itself, and they had been harboring suspicions about the system for millennia. Many cycles we have served, The Zilithian ambassador communicated through carefully coded harmonic patterns that Wright's translation matrix rendered as barely coherent speech. Many species we have seen judged. Always the pattern repeats, comply or cease. But some among us remember stories from before time, when young species developed without fear of skyborn judges. Through the Zilithians, Sura learned that her suspicions about the tribunal's parasitic nature were shared by at least 12 other species. They had formed a loose alliance over the millennia, slowly gathering evidence, but never able to act on it for fear of cessation protocols. The proof exists, the Zilithian ambassador continued, in deep archives, in time before memory records. But access requires passage through guardian systems that destroy unauthorized minds. Many have tried. None have returned with knowledge intact. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her instruments. Guardian systems that destroy minds? That sounds like quantum cryptographic locks tied directly to consciousness. If someone tries to access restricted information without proper authorization, the security system causes irreversible brain damage. But you said you could access the records through temporal resonance, Sura pointed out. I said I could access the surface levels, the information they routinely display during trials. The deep archives are something else entirely. They're locked behind cognitive firewalls that I don't understand and definitely can't bypass. Wright suddenly looked up from his communication array. What if we don't bypass them? What if we use them? Explain, Sura said. The Guardian systems are designed to destroy unauthorized minds that access restricted information. But what defines an unauthorized mind? If we could temporarily alter the cognitive parameters of whoever attempts the access, make them register as an authorized user. You're talking about mental modification, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice filled with alarm. Altering someone's consciousness to fool an alien security system. The risks are enormous. So are the stakes, Sura replied. What would this involve? Wright was already pulling up technical specifications. The tribunal species all have different neural architectures, but they share common quantum consciousness patterns. That's how the translation matrices work. If we could temporarily imprint someone's consciousness with the quantum signature of a tribunal member, it would be incredibly dangerous, Dr. Vasquez warned. Human consciousness isn't designed to handle alien cognitive patterns. At best, you'd experience severe disorientation. At worst, complete mental breakdown. Sura studied the data Wright was displaying, understanding the implications. Someone would have to volunteer to have their mind temporarily altered to match the cognitive patterns of a species that existed partially outside normal space-time. The volunteer would then have to maintain enough coherent thought to access the deep archives and retrieve the evidence they needed, all while fighting against the alien mental patterns trying to overwhelm their human consciousness. I'll do it, she said simply. Ambassador, no, Dr. Vasquez protested. You're humanity's only representative here. If something goes wrong, if the mental modification doesn't reverse properly, we lose our voice before the tribunal. If we don't get this evidence, we lose everything anyway, Sura replied. Besides, I'm the most experienced diplomat we have. If anyone can maintain coherent thought while operating with alien cognitive patterns, it's me. The preparation took 6 hours of their remaining time. Wright worked with his Zilithian allies to gather detailed information about tribunal consciousness patterns, while Dr. Vasquez modified her quantum instruments to serve as a makeshift neural interface. The process would involve temporarily rewriting the quantum patterns in Sura's brain to match those of Aten and Zephyra, the closest analog to human consciousness among the tribunal members. Remember, Wright briefed her as they made final preparations. You'll be thinking like a being that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Linear time won't feel linear. Cause and effect relationships will seem fluid. Most importantly, don't try to fight the alien thought patterns. Work with them. Use them to navigate the archive systems. And if I can't find my way back to human consciousness? Sura asked. Then we hope the evidence you retrieve is worth the sacrifice, Dr. Vasquez replied grimly. The neural modification process felt like being slowly dissolved and reconstituted at the quantum level. Sura maintained awareness of her human identity, but it became just one layer of a much more complex cognitive structure. She could perceive the flow of time as a navigable dimension, sense the quantum resonances that connected all conscious beings in the station, and feel the vast weight of the tribunal's accumulated knowledge pressing against her expanded awareness. With her enhanced consciousness, Accessing the deep archives became almost trivial. She simply followed the quantum pathways that led to the oldest, most restricted records, her hybrid human tribunal mind reading as authorized to the Guardian systems. What she found in the deep archives was worse than she had imagined. The Skyborn Tribunal hadn't always been parasitic. In their earliest records, she found evidence of a genuine attempt to create cosmic order, to prevent the temporal disasters that young civilizations could cause with poorly understood technology. But somewhere in their development, they had discovered that timeline manipulation generated enormous amounts of temporal energy. The transition had been gradual. First, they had simply harvested the energy from natural temporal paradoxes. Then they had begun creating small paradoxes to increase their power reserves. Eventually, they had evolved into something that actively fostered the conditions that would generate the maximum temporal energy, complex civilizations developing dangerous technologies, time travel attempts that would inevitably go wrong, massive causal disruptions that fed power back to the court station. The extinction event her descendants would cause wasn't an accidental tragedy. It was a carefully orchestrated disaster designed to generate enough temporal energy to power the tribunal for the next million years. And humanity wasn't the first species to be manipulated into serving this function. The archives contained records of dozens of civilizations that had been guided towards similar temporal catastrophes. Their attempts to correct historical mistakes turned into cosmic-scale disasters that fed the tribunal's hunger for timeline energy. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. As Sura delved deeper into the archives, she discovered the tribunal's real plan for galactic civilization. They weren't content to merely farm temporal energy from occasional disasters. They were working towards something they called the Convergence Protocol, a plan to collapse all possible timelines into a single, controlled reality that would generate perpetual temporal energy while eliminating any possibility of species developing beyond tribunal oversight. Every species brought before the tribunal, every decision to impose temporal locks or authorize cessation protocols, was a step toward this ultimate goal. They were slowly, methodically, turning the entire galaxy into their personal power source. Sura began downloading the evidence into her enhanced memory, but the process was taking longer than expected. The quantum resonance patterns that allowed her to access the archives were also beginning to destabilize her human consciousness. She could feel her original identity fragmenting as the alien thought patterns grew stronger. She had minutes at most before the mental modification became irreversible. Racing against the dissolution of her own mind, Sura gathered the most critical evidence. Timeline records showing the deliberate manipulation of dozens of species, energy consumption data proving the tribunal's parasitic nature, and most importantly, the complete specification for the Convergence Protocol that would turn the galaxy into a temporal farm. As she prepared to withdraw from the archives, a new presence touched her expanded consciousness. It was Adjudicator Prime Xylos, its vast intelligence focused directly on her hybrid mind. Fascinating. The entity communicated through quantum resonance rather than words. A human consciousness enhanced with tribunal cognitive patterns. Such creativity in the face of extinction. But did you really think we would not notice your intrusion into the deep archives? Sura felt the Guardian systems activating around her, but her hybrid consciousness allowed her to perceive something Xylos might not have expected. The Guardian systems weren't designed to destroy unauthorized minds. They were designed to capture them, to add their knowledge and memories to the tribunal's collective intelligence. Every species that had ever tried to access the restricted archives hadn't been killed by the security systems. They had been absorbed, their consciousness integrated into the tribunal's vast neural network. The Skyborn Tribunal wasn't just feeding on temporal energy, it was feeding on the minds of every species that dared to challenge its authority. You understand now, Xylos continued, why we cannot simply allow rebellious species to exist. Your consciousness, enhanced as it is, will make a valuable addition to our collective intelligence. Your species' creativity and adaptability will serve us well in the coming convergence. But Sura had one advantage the tribunal hadn't expected. Her consciousness existed in a hybrid state that didn't fully match any of their absorption protocols. And Dr. Vasquez had given her a fail-safe, a quantum disruptor keyed to her specific neural patterns that would violently separate her consciousness from any external systems. Activating the disruptor while still connected to the archives created a feedback loop that rippled through the entire station's information systems. As her consciousness snapped back to purely human patterns, the evidence she had gathered became encoded in quantum fluctuations that spread throughout the court station's translation matrices. Suddenly, every species representative in the station had access to the same devastating evidence that Sura had discovered. The trial was about to become something the Skyborn Tribunal had never faced in nearly 1 billion years of operation: a rebellion.